So they have a sense of what it means to be an activist in your own local situation. She's not been in a school in all of her travels around the country where rejection isn't an accepted norm. And that's kind of the place where I want to stop for a little conversation. That's a pretty strong statement that rejection is accepted in many schools and classrooms. And these are examples of what a child means by rejection. The Teddy story is dramatic. Without his car, he can't be part of the story. But turning away and making a child feel not listened to, when there are multiple things going on in your classroom. So is that true? Do you feel in your school that rejection, despite all of our talk about respect and kavod and listening, I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about creating classroom communities, but I want to know what you think about that claim that she's making, and whether we have a different set of schools because these are Jewish day schools.
One of the things that has always bothered me is when there are problems on the playground and children take the problems home to their parents, almost always the first reaction from the parent is, just ignore that kid and don't play with them. And it makes it hard for me as a teacher because we don't allow them to do that in my classroom. But it also, there is sort of this understanding. People say to me, well, rejection is a part of life, therefore the kids should learn it. Therefore, that you need to allow them to reject each other, and the kids need to figure out what to do when they are rejected. But I think that my job as a teacher and what I'm trying to create in my classroom is not the world as it is, but the world as I want it to be.
When the students perceive that they're being rejected, those who they feel they're being rejected by would never think that they are doing the rejecting. But in terms, and that so often it was that they're not being listened to. Respect is this abstract term, and my kids are in 3rd grade, and it goes in one ear and out the other. So I think our language has to change regarding it. I think some schools, I sort of feel like in my school, which is an Orthodox day school, in some of my classes I have an easier time teaching my kids to not reject because of Torah values.
And one of the units that I teach is called We and They, and it's all about the idea of creating in-groups and out-groups, eventually leading up to the study of the Holocaust. But we start with looking at the 8th grade class. What are the cliques that are forming in the 8th grade class, and why do we have a natural tendency as human beings to create these in-groups and out-groups, and what's beneficial to having a group and what's detrimental. So I think on some level rejection is part of human nature, but then it's, how can we modify it so that it's not rejection, but I guess what I'm saying is there's something powerful to having a group, but then you also have to be careful about who you're putting outside the group and what does it mean if someone's really, really on the outside. And that's sort of where I go with my phasing history class. Once you're really on the outside, then you can have genocide.
One of the things that I noticed was that I had a hard time convincing the faculty and the parents that there was even an issue. And they were really in denial. And these things were going on the playground, not letting someone play, making faces, eye rolling is a really big one. Of course, now all the internet usages. And teachers continually said they saw nothing. They were blind to it. And when I kind of stepped back and looked, some of the teachers were bullies themselves in a lot of ways. They were the ones who sat in the back of the faculty room or at a faculty meeting rolling their eyes that something didn't relate.
Giving voice to students, being able to ask students and really give them a voice to talk about their own experiences and differences. One of the most powerful things that I've been a part of as a teacher and as an advisor is allowing students who really are feeling rejection in the most extreme sense to be able to in a really safe environment, create a space where they can actually talk about it with their peers. Because by opening the dialogue and making what hasn't been talked about but it's been experienced really in the forefront, it makes it so it's one unbelievable way to facilitate change.
And they really need the teacher to help them through it. But I think some teachers feel that it's so much, and they need 15 minutes to talk to their colleagues at recess, and they really can't take the time, or they feel that they can't take the time to really help the kids through these problems. But just because you've taught them, 30 minutes a week in your open circle lesson doesn't mean they can really apply it yet. So they still need the support all the time.
Well, there were some students on the playground who are constantly having conflict with this one child, and they're not including him. And instead of saying, oh, you can't tell him that he can't play with you, it's not kind of you, if you actually pull them aside and realize it, he's really mean to them. So I think as teachers, it's important to remember that sometimes children are entitled to say, this child is being really mean to me. That is why I don't want to play with them.
I've taken the whole childhood and into adulthood to learn what it means to be moral. And yeah, I guess I've just learned to kind of stay the course.
I teach in a high school, which we'd all like to believe they've been enlightened and evolved, but oftentimes it actually gets to be much worse. There's macro issues. We have kids who come out in high school. We have kids who suddenly there's socioeconomic issues that become much more apparent in high school that can cause there to be exclusive groups of the kids that can afford to buy the fancy Lexus and the kids that can't. And then it also gets to be that it's almost more, they have more power as they get older.
When I think about my training as a moral leader in my life, I always go back to this story that my mom told me when I was young. She just said, Shira, I was a geek. I was like the geek, and I was rejected because I wore glasses and because of the clothes that I wore. And I just want you to remember that, there'll always be that person in your class, and, that was me. So treat that person with a lot of compassion and love and respect. And I remember going through school, and there was always that person or that girl that was being rejected by whatever crew I was running with. And I remember that I was moved to be more inclusive and to, sometimes invite her to sit at my table, and my friends would say, what's up? Why is Beth sitting with us? And I stood up, and I remember feeling great about that. And I want to impart that to students in my class, to have the wherewithal to be that person and to be the bridge between the kid who's being rejected for whatever reason. And I was just going to say, in another vein, that another fabulous tool that one can use as a teacher for working through these things is writing. And especially poetry, I feel, is like a fabulous method for expressing some of these feelings of rejection and exclusion. Kids who are adopted or kids who, act out for various reasons can maybe sometimes not talk about it, especially, I teach third grade, so especially when they're younger, they really haven't come to understand what's happening with them, what they're feeling. So sort of in a private way, they can work through in their writing how they're feeling. And it's a lesson about great writing. Great writing is raw, I believe, and very honest. So I just think that it's a fabulous tool for working through rejection and exclusion.
We could study this problem in our context. Jewish day schools, if they're not moral communities, then what are we doing? It's exactly what some of you have been saying. And people have described problematic situations. We could write up our own cases, and we could mobilize one another as resources in thinking about how we really foster the values that are so central to Judaism as the living values inside the classroom and outside the classroom. I just want to highlight a few things that people said. I think the point that several people made about the invisibility of rejected, you kind of started us on this, but we almost don't always know. Sometimes it's clear and blatant and explicit, but sometimes it's not. And parents can play a constructive and a more and less constructive role, but they need our help and we need their help. I mean, this is an agenda, I think, that embraces parents as part of the the building of a moral community.